and welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast. We're coming to you from BMC Engage in Las Vegas. I'm Kirsty McGowan, and I'm here with Charlie Betts.
Kirsty.
Carlos Casanova.
Kirsty.
And now we're speaking with Tim Boudreau from Flexera. Welcome, Tim. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you guys.
Welcome, Tim.
Tim, it's great to see you here. I've been following the software asset management space for some time. I think, as we heard in the keynote this morning, it's all about digital transformation, it's about agility. Open source wasn't necessarily mentioned from the stage, but of course that's something that we're seeing a lot of use of open source software, and developers kind of just sourcing and selecting whatever tools seem appropriate to the task they have at hand. Of course, there are perhaps some consequences to that. And I'd love to hear what you're seeing in the industry and hearing from your customers as far as this new generation of software asset management, and where you think things are going to go.
Yeah, I mean, you're really hitting on some key elements there. Accessibility to software, new technologies that enable consumption of software, and most of the time organizations simply aren't aware of the ramifications of utilizing software in these new and interesting ways. Mm-hmm. And the impact can be literally millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, do you see organizations putting structures and governance in place? Because I mean, obviously, some of these utilities or tools or software packages out that open source and whatnot, they're good. They're valuable. They're incredibly efficient. But yet at the same time, you can't just download them from anywhere and start using them randomly. So, how do you see that plays into, because we can't deny them the use because they'll either go around or whatnot.
Yeah, they're just going to do it anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do you see some of the governance around individuals doing that and companies leveraging it?
Well, I mean, for one, organizations that are deploying portals, for instance, the ability to track the OKs or the approvals for utilizing software. That's one of the areas that we're certainly seeing.
Okay, so you're seeing that companies are still attempting to have a technology lifecycle management process. Some companies call it a technology adoption process, but this process remains in effect. That if you want to use something, you need to register it, and the enterprise needs to know that we have this thing in the shop.
Well, it's in its infancy, right? But organizations are certainly starting to understand, the intricacies involved with this, right? Yeah. They're consulting with us, they're consulting with our partners around the best practices, and we are starting to see adoption.
Yeah, I can hear, some of the agile folks saying, well, why do we need to do this? I mean, just let me have the software. There's a story making...
Nothing will go wrong.
There's a story making the rounds. I mean, there was this open source software apparently, I think over in Europe, and it had a, fairly liberal license, and then with some minor release, they changed the license to something more restrictive. Apparently, this little open source property got taken over by some people whose motivations weren't the best, and then all of a sudden, there's this guy and his lawyer knocking on all these doors in Europe saying, pay up now, and of course...
the interesting thing that you just hit on is, product use rights. And how license agreements can change at the drop of a hat. Yep. And so, understanding the ramifications of a license change is paramount to the whole governance process.
So when that little window comes up on your screens and says our license has changed, tick here,
and you just accept
tick here so you've read it, and you just go tick, okay, let's carry on.
You don't read all that. Scroll and scroll. You don't read all that. Yeah, it is a crazy sort of world, right? Because again, we can't deny that, because there are pieces there that will enable productivity and better digital experience for some of these users. So how do we go about that? How do we limit our risk, but yet still provide that? And that's a challenging space that you guys are in.
And certainly what we're seeing organizations do is adopt. It might not be always upfront, but they're certainly trying to adopt best practices and business processes around management of the software when it's out in the wild, right? Understanding what we have, in our environment, keeping on top of what we have in our environment, always marrying that up to what's been purchased, right? And then always understanding what the license rights and ramifications are with that as well. And it can't always be handled on the front end, but if you employ business practices on the back end that, enable you to manage this process going forward, that's certainly some of the things that our customers are asking us to do with our solutions.
Yeah, if you could take kind of a risk-driven approach, perhaps.
Yeah.
You know, it's because the stuff is going to show up in the wild, as you say, but
Yeah.
it can also be discovered. I mean, assuming that you have the right, you know, technology, you know, in the estate to discover it. I think that's important, and you know, given the liabilities that can crop up, I mean, we've all heard, you know, stories of, you know, the 7-figure, 8-figure true-ups, and it's not a conversation I would want to be in with my CFO.
Not where you want to be. And just that's actually understanding what's out there and what's interacting with what, and you know, what's talking to what. I mean, so many businesses actually don't understand what's out there.
Well, and the interesting thing is that when we talk about discovering what's out in the environment, we don't see customers using one thing. Right.
No.
I mean, usually it's a myriad of multiple technologies you know, that they're using to try and understand what's deployed in that environment, right? And they certainly are asking us to interface and work with those discovery technologies to help them make sense of the data that they're uncovering.
So are you finding that a lot of these organizations that are putting the governance in place, when they're doing the discovery, are they still finding a considerable amount of individuals circumventing the processes and bringing down these things? Are you still, seeing that even in the more mature organizations?
Absolutely, right? I mean, and that's why, some of the things that they're adopting are around, whitelisting and blacklisting software, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Understanding what software is acceptable for someone to go out and get versus what software isn't acceptable, to go out and get. And then having a business process to go and reclaim that software, get that software off their users' desktop environment or server environment once they find it.
Right. Is there do you find any particular area that they're leveraging this, or is it pretty much all areas of capabilities that they're bringing in some of this software? Is it mainly for the lower level foundational type capabilities? Is it more the end user experience capabilities? Because, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different categories of software. Is it across the board, or is it anywhere? I'm just wondering from a technologist perspective, where we're an organization, we're financial services or whatever, and we're not specialty on some of the low level stuff, so that's where they tend to do it, or is it just every industry is kind of doing their own?
Well, I think an industry that's very heavy on engineer and software engineering, for instance, right? That's where people are very creative in the software that they're going out to download and utilize. They're trying to do whatever they need to do to achieve the task at hand. Now, industries that just have end user productivity, desktop users, tablet users, that type of thing, we don't see that nearly as much from a concern of people going out and grabbing open source or something along those lines, right? It's certainly more geared towards the the technical or development environments where people are just trying to do whatever they need to do to get their job done.
Yeah, and they'll just grab whatever, this looks like it's going to do the job I want, so let's just, and often the people who are working in that sort of environment too have got a lot more rights than your normal
discussion
customer,
around admin rights,
so
right?
they can grab anything they want.
The developers are typically going to need
and if they don't have the rights, they'll get around it somehow.
They'll figure it out.
Well, and the other community that's very interesting, right, is especially for our organization, right? Our sales organization has admin rights. And if we need to go out and grab software to help create a presentation or help do something along those lines, right, we go out and do it. And we're starting to have those discussions around locking that down, right, and going through a governance process through our IT organization that ensures that what we're going out and getting is acceptable software.
Yeah, interesting. I just in closing, I'm actually a fan. I'm actually consulting on some related topics, and I'm a big fan of actually trying to fix this at the process level with processes that don't block people from getting what they it's like look, if somebody downloads something, they should be able to keep using it, at least in a development sense, and then but right away it should raise a flag. And then the governance and the support organizations, if they don't want that person using that software, they need to scramble and figure out what else that person needs to do. But rather than just putting a roadblock in their way, I think too often we just assume, well, we can just roadblock them, and 90 days later, I'm sorry, they were trying to get real business value done, and maybe they didn't choose the right or the best tool, so go help them fix that, and instead of just being the department of no. I mean,
that's why I really like what you mentioned, the whitelist and blacklist, because at least those have already been established.
Yes.
And we're communicating. At least these things we know about. These are bad. These are good. And then if it's something different, then to your point, Charlie, we can say, okay, we don't know about these. So if it's not on any one of these lists, at least let's get to, a really quick process to validate which one, which one should it be?
Yeah.
Well, and the other angle on that is a lot of times organizations are building their own open source software, right? And they're deploying their own open source software. So they need the ability to track, manage and understand where that open source is within their own environment, despite it being an internally developed application.
Wow.
Good point.
Well, Tim, thanks for your time today.
It's been wonderful.
A pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you, Tim.
sharing your knowledge.
Great.
Thank you.